Since childhood, you've heard about let there be light. But have you ever wondered what existed before that? Before the first word was spoken, before the sound echoed in the void, there was something or someone watching in absolute silence. A silence that was not absence, but perhaps the most dense and sacred presence in all creation. Few stop to reflect on this. The Bible begins with a verb, yes, but why doesn't the text reveal the moment before? The exact moment when everything was about to be, and yet wasn't. What was God thinking? What did he choose not to say? Why is there this veiled interval between the Spirit hovering over the waters and the first sound that gave rise to the universe? What you're about to discover may surprise you, because perhaps the biggest mysteries of creationdo not dwell on what has been revealed, but on what has been hidden, on what has not been said, on what is there between the lines of Genesis, waiting for eyes that know how to see beyond the words. Stay with me until the end, because we're going to explore this void that precedes the verb, this enigma that crosses time, the divine silence. And we're not talking about an ordinary silence, but a silence charged with intention, with hidden purpose. A silence that perhaps contains the deepest secrets of divine origin. Have you ever felt like there's something traditional religions aren't telling you? Have you ever felt like part of the truth has been hidden on purpose? Well, that's exactly the path we're going to follow now. Ancient apocryphal texts, such as the Book of Enoch, suggest that silence was the first witness to creation. And ancient mystics believed that God's very name was initially a sound, never spoken. Imagine this. What if what God chose not to say was even more powerful than what he said? But this is just the beginning, because true revelation is about to emerge from the shadows of Genesis. And when it comes, you may never hear silence the same way again. By the way, if this kind of reflection awakens something within you, if at any point this idea of divine silence made you shiver, question, or even remember a feeling you once had when faced with the unknown, I invite you to share it here in the comments. Seriously, what has touched you most so far? What does this silence make you imagine? Your experience may seem personal, intimate, but it can be the key to awakening others as well. It's through our comments that we build this sacred space of exchange and discovery, a place where the hidden can be revealed by those with eyes to see. And if this journey resonates with you, don't forget to like the video. It helps a lot. Each like shows YouTube that this content is relevant and allows it to reach more people who, like you, are searching for something beyond the surface. And of course, if you feel this kind of message speaks to your soul, subscribe to the channel, not just to follow the next videos, but to be part of something bigger. Because this channel isn't just about the mysteries of creation. It's about a community of seekers, of awakened ones, of souls who know there's more between heaven and earth than what we've been told. Now, take a deep breath, because the silence will be broken once more. And what comes next may change everything you thought you knew about the beginning of all things. Not everything has been said, and perhaps, in divine silence, lies the greatest of secrets about the mysteries of creation. And when you stop to think honestly, you realize that existence itself already carries gaps, voids, silences that no one can explain. Why does the sacred text begin with, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth," and not say how this beginning came into being? Who created time so that there could be a beginning? Who or what existed before it all began? This lack of response, this silence, perhaps isn't an oversight. Perhaps it's an invitation to contemplation, to searching, to listening to what lies beyond sound. Because divine silence isn't empty. It pulsates. It holds codes. It is the backstage of existence. Traditional theology has taught us to seek revelation in words. But what if what matters most is precisely what way submitted what was unwritten, unspoken, yet still shapes everything around us? Creation didn't begin with an explosion of words. It began with a space, an interval, a pause. What was there? The impact of this is profound, because if silence precedes speech, then it is older than the verb, more primitive than light. And in many mystical traditions, silence is described as the pure state of divine consciousness before it manifests. It is the mind of God before the decision to create. And this changes everything. Think about your own life. How many decisions were born in silence? Before the yes, the no, the path you chose, there was a moment of pause, of inner listening, of invisible connection. That's where the origin lies. That's where the mystery resides. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this silence before let there be light also carries an intention. Nothing coming from God is without purpose. And when something is left unsaid, that too is a language. It's a code not spoken, but felt. And at that point, silence transforms into a creative force. In ancient Kabbalistic writings, there's the idea that the first sound of creation was actually the sound of silence being broken, as if there was a divine tension, a state of absolute containment, until a single vibration spanned the abyss. And that vibration wasn't a word. It was a wish, a decision, God's first decision. The Zohar, one of the most profound texts of Jewish mysticism, says that before all things, there existed the Ein Sof, the limitless one, a God without form, without name, without definition. And when the Ein Sof decided to create, he contracted. Yes, it did. This concept, called Tzimtzum, speaks of a God who withdraws from himself, creating an empty space within which creation could occur, a primordial, sacred silence, which is not absence, but absolute containment of all that is. Imagine the weight of that. A God who chooses silence, so that something new can exist. A God who chooses silence as the first act of creative love. Because to speak is to give, but to be silent is to allow. This understanding changes our mindset. It shows that silence is more than a pause. It's possibility. It's a womb. It's fertile ground for light to be born with purpose. And perhaps what's most missing today in our noisy world, full of shallow truths and the noise of opinions, is this listening to divine silence. Perhaps you're feeling it now. A kind of memory that isn't of the mind, but of the soul. Something that awakens and whispers, "You've been here before," because the silence of creation is inscribed within us, in our pauses, in our doubts, in our emptiness. And that's why, right now, I want you to write something. Not for me, but to activate this awareness within yourself. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. Because if this silence has spoken to you this far, maybe it's about to reveal even more to you. Let there be light. These two words shape not only the creation of the universe as we know it, but also our entire understanding of divine origin, the creative verb, the word as an instrument of absolute power. This is the narrative we've heard since our first encounters with the sacred text. God spoke, and everything came into being. But what if the very existence of this phrase concealed something even deeper? In the biblical tradition, the word carries a mystical weight. It is not just sound. It is action. It is reality in motion. When God speaks, the universe obeys. There is no interval between speech and manifestation. There is no doubt. And so, the verb became a symbol of divine authority, of sovereignty, of order being imposed over chaos. But there's a subtlety there that many people overlook. Before let there be light, there was darkness, there was an abyss, and there was a spirit of God hovering over the waters. All of this in silence, in preparation, as if creation were a stage, and the word merely the curtain that opens. But the show was already happening behind the scenes of existence. And this backstage is where our spiritual journey truly begins. It's interesting to note how the very structure of Genesis points to a decision, a deliberate moment in which God chose Act 10. This choice wasn't made impulsively. It was born of silence, a gestational silence, charged with intention, where the word is formed before it is spoken. Let there be isn't just an order. It's a birth, a release of something that already existed within the divine mind. This shift in mindset is crucial because it shows us that the creative word is not the beginning of history, but its first audible record. What happened before remains shrouded in mystery. And it is in this unrecorded space that the hidden truth resides, that which words could not contain. The word is the beginning of language, but silence is the beginning of consciousness. And this divine consciousness that precedes verbal creation has a direct impact on our own life experience. How many times have you felt that something important was about to happen, even before any external sign? A premonition, a silent perception. It is in this state that the spirit hovers, that the invisible begins to organize itself. That creation prepares its leap. And precisely for this reason, let there be light cannot be read simply as a phrase. It is a portal, a rupture, the sound that pierces the silence with purpose, the transition from the hidden to the visible, from eternity to time. And most impressively, all of this happens through the verb, not as just any sound, but as a force capable of reorganizing chaos, of giving things a name, of transforming emptiness into meaning. Hebrew wisdom calls this power catalytic word that means thing, event, word, and action all at once. In other words, what God says doesn't just sound. It materializes. It takes shape. This reveals that, in the biblical context, divine speech is inseparable from reality. There is no separation between intention and result. This is absolute power. But then, if the word is so powerful, why did silence come first? Why did the Spirit of God hover over the waters, saying nothing, acting nothing, just observing? That's the key. Silence was the ground where the word was gestated. And perhaps that's why Genesis doesn't begin with "let there be light," but with the Spirit in motion in silence. This shift in perspective has a transformative impact, because it leads us to recognize that what we see, hear, and perceive is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a deeper dimension, prior to speech, where the highest decisions are made. And if God, being God, remains silent before acting, what does this teach us about our own decisions? How often do we leap from chaos to speech without giving the Spirit room to soar? How often do we try to create, transform, define, without first delving into that hidden place of consciousness where everything is organized in the invisible? The silence of creation is a spiritual lesson, a revelation, a reminder that the word is sacred, but silence is holy. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because the real way to create a verb is not only in what God said, but because he chose these words and no others. What was the intention behind "let there be light"? And what else could have been said, but was silenced? Comment here. That makes sense to me, just so I know that this silence is also speaking to you. Genesis begins with creation, but does not explain what was created from what. He says the earth was formless and empty, that darkness was upon the face of the deep, but he doesn't say where the earth, the deep, or the darkness itself came from. These elements were already there, silently, as if they were traces of a previous story, an untold story. And this is where the mystery intensifies. Why doesn't the Bible detail what existed before the sound? Why did the Spirit of God hover over the waters, but not act? What was he waiting for? What was the state of creation before light, before speech, before order? The text is direct, almost economical. There are no explanations, only declarations. And precisely for this reason, the silence of Genesis is so powerful, because it is charged with deliberate absence, with purposeful omission. When something as grand as the birth of the cosmos is described in so few words, the question that echoes is, what was left out and why? Tradition has led us to believe that the abyss mentioned there was merely a void. But the original word tiham carries a much denser idea, a profound chaos, a primordial sea, an ancient and unfathomable place. It's not a simple dark hole. It's a cosmic entity, and it's there, present but without explanation. This doesn't seem like an overlooked detail. It seems like an intentional choice. Perhaps because some truths cannot be spoken, only felt. Or perhaps because, in the beginning, God didn't want to reveal everything at once. Which leads us to the following reflection. What if divine silence was not only prior to word, but a barrier between what can and what it cannot reveal to humanity? A boundary between what we can understand and what we are not yet ready to bear. It is at this point that the narrative becomes a journey, because silence, instead of distancing us from the truth, pulls us into it. It invites us to pierce the veil, to delve into this space between the known and the unrevealed. And this in itself brings about a transformation, because it forces us to listen differently. No longer with our ears, but with our soul. Think about it. Why would God choose not to describe the abyss? Why does he simply mention it and move on? Perhaps because the abyss is not something external. Perhaps it is a mirror of our own interiority, a symbol of what is chaotic, formless, and dark within us. And before light can be spoken, it must first be desired. It must emerge from the silence that carries this abyss within. This hidden truth completely transforms our view of creation. It reveals that it did not begin with a start, but with a silent preparation, a cosmic pause, a kind of spiritual gestation, where time did not yet count, where the word was not yet formed, where the spirit only observed chaos, like someone waiting for the exact moment to act, not out of haste, but out of wisdom. This is where we come into contact with something much greater than doctrine, something bordering on the ineffable, because a lack of explanations about what existed before the light is not a theological error. It's divine pedagogy. It's God saying, there are things you will only understand if you have the courage to inhabit the silence. And this affects everything. Our way of interpreting the sacred, our mindset of wanting ready-made answers, the way we navigate our own moments of darkness, where everything seems formless and empty, because sometimes the silence that disturbs us is the same one that prepares us. And perhaps God left these blank spaces on purpose, so that we could fill them with searching, with perception, with presence, with that kind of listening that happens not when we read, but when we feel, when we let absence speak. May the unsaid transform us. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because if silence came before the verb, and the abyss was not explained, this means there are hidden codes in this narrative. And most impressively, these codes are not only in the text, they are also in what the text avoided revealing. Comment here. The truth lies in silence, just so I know that this mystery has reached you too. The silence of Genesis is not merely an absence of words. It is an entity in itself, a living space, a sacred field where the divine dwells before even being named. It is as if, before time, form, and even light, there existed a presence that manifests itself not in what it says, but in what it chooses to remain silent. And this silence, far from being empty, is so dense, so full, that it almost suffocates. It needs no sound to have weight. It tanned weight, the weight of what is about to exist, of what awaits its time, of what carries the origin of everything in gestation. In the mystical tradition, some say that this silence is not just a condition, but a consciousness, a kind of divine intelligence that observes, sustains, and prepares, and that, paradoxically, can only be accessed when we let go of easy answers, the noise of logic, the automatic explanations that attempt to tame the mystery. This silence doesn't want to be deciphered. It wants to be sense. It is a language too old to translate, and so is left where it belonged, between the word, behind the verb, below the surface of the text. Some Kabbalists call the state to act the nothing, but this nothingness is not absolute absence. It is a fertile nothingness, a spiritual womb, a cosmic matrix from which everything springs. It is a point where God is not yet God, where being is not yet named itself, where infinity rests upon itself in contemplation, in no hurry to reveal itself. This is the silence of creation, not as an interval, but as an intention. And here we begin to understand that silence is, perhaps, the first form of divine manifestation. Before light, there was presence. Before speech, there was perception. And this perception needed no sound, because it was total, complete, a consciousness that doesn't narrate. It simply is. This changes the way we view Genesis, not as an explosive beginning, but as a careful revelation, a revelation that begins, not starting, that says, without saying, that insinuates itself, without showing itself completely, because there are parts of God that cannot be revealed in words, only experienced in the space where words cease. This understanding invites us to something greater than theological analysis. It pushes us inward, toward a journey where silence becomes a teacher, a guide that doesn't provide answers, but provokes questions, a mirror that doesn't show the face, but the emptiness behind the eyes, a space that reveals more about the divine than 1,000 well-formulated phrases. And if you ever felt this at some point in your life, that kind of silence that doesn't bother you, but envelopes you, that seems to speak to parts of you you never knew existed, then you've touched this place. And maybe you didn't realize it. Maybe you called it intuition, or peace, or even solitude, but it was there, the same silence that hovered over the waters before the light dawned, the same that, to this day, hovers over everything that is yet to come. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because when we understand silence as a spiritual entity, an inevitable question begins to emerge. If silence is the first body of creation, what does it contain? What secrets does it hold? And why? To this day, there seems to be an invisible effort to ensure that this language is never fully deciphered. Comment here. Silence as a voice, just so I know that this emptiness is also whispering something inside you. The silence of creation echoes in more places than most realize. And it didn't stop at Genesis. Quite the opposite. In ancient texts banned, forgotten, or simply ignored by official tradition, this silence is treated not as an absence, but as the highest presence that can exist. A presence that precedes even the name of God. No Book of Enoch, for example, there are mentions of voices that were not heard by any flesh. Voices that arose before he off the structure of the world, coming from a place where time did not yet exist. Enoch, the man who walked with God, speaks of a primordial sound vibrating in the heavens, but it is not a sound as we know it. It is something felt within, as if the very structure of the soul recognized it without ever having heard it with its ears. This sound, or rather, this vibration prior to sound, appears in another tradition, Kabbalah. Kabbalists say that before the universe was formed, there was a divine contraction, a withdrawal of God to make room for the world. This process is called Tzimtzum, and what remains in this divinely created space is not chaos, but absolute silence. A silence charged with potential, with latent energy, with everything that would become, but was not yet, and what sustains the space. The unsaid, the unrevealed, that which has not yet been uttered by any living being. This is where the concept often in verb, something that permeates the deepest teachings of Hebrew mysticism, a verb that was not recorded, that is hidden behind the word Bereshit, in the beginning of Genesis, but that carries a previous message, a lost code, a name that has never been revealed. The Zohar, a central text of Kabbalah, goes even deeper. It describes the beginning of everything as a point of light hidden within a black veil, a point so small it was invisible, yet was the core of all existence. This point emitted a vibration, but before that, it remained in complete silence, and not just any silence, but one that was conscious, that had a will, that observed, contemplated, and only then decided to vibrate. It's fascinating how these traditions agree on something rarely discussed. Creation didn't begin with a bang. It began with a silent decision, with an impulse that wasn't spoken but felt, a will of God that remained hidden, protected, concealed beneath layers of text, language, and translation. And perhaps that's why these texts were ignored for so long, because they speak of a God who doesn't need to explain himself, who doesn't shout, who doesn't reveal himself to everyone, but who in silence reveals himself to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear what is unsaid. This truth has a direct impact on our own journey, because we are trained to seek answers outside ourselves, in books, in doctrines, in discourses. But what if the answer lies in what no one is saying, in what was purposefully left out, in the blank space between one line and the next of the sacred text? There's a hidden beauty there, a beauty that can't be translated into sentences, but that transforms those who come into contact with it. Because when you realize that the hidden verb still vibrates, that the unspoken name still hangs in the air, you understand that creation hasn't stopped. It continues. Here, now, in you, and silence, rather than being the end, is the portal to something much greater. Now I want to go even deeper into the subject. Because if there are unpronounced names, sounds that have never been heard by human ears, and vibrations that predate language itself, what else is hidden behind what we call creation? Comment here. There's something hidden between the lines, just so I know you're also listening to what the silence still has to say. Now, when we consider the silence as an entity, as a vibration prior to sound, the inevitable question arises, what does this silence reveal about God? Did he choose silence as a veil, as a deliberate way of hiding parts of himself that could only be perceived by those who dare to seek? And if so, what does this tell us about the divine nature itself? In many traditions, silence is not just a resource. It is a sacred language, a field of revelation where the eternal communicates without form, without voice, without definition. It is no wonder that mystics said that God's true name cannot be pronounced, because he is not limited to sound, words, or writing. God, in his essence, reveals himself through that which we cannot define, and silence is the perfect expression of this. Total presence without containment. In mystical theology, silence is more than absence. It is the guardian of what is too sacred to be touched, as if the divine, out of compassion, covered certain truths with a veil of silence, not to hide them, but to preserve them. For some revelations can only be received when the soul is ready. And until that happens, silence remains as a protective space between the human and the eternal. The symbolic veil appears in several narratives. In the Holy of Holies, for example, the most sacred place in the temple, there was a curtain that separated God's presence from human gaze. It wasn't a barrier of exclusion. It was a protection, a reminder that the divine demands reverence, preparation, and awareness. Silence is the same veil, but without fabric, invisible, and yet as present as the air. And this veil also manifests within us, because the spiritual journey doesn't happen only through reading or listening. It happens in the gap between thoughts. The moment the mind falls silent and the heart begins to listen. Divine silence isn't just in the text. It's in the pause, in the void between one sentence and the next, in the inspiration that precedes a truth that cannot be explained, but that transforms. Understand the impact of this. God, the creator of all, does not begin his manifestation with a shout, with a grand gesture, but with silence, a silence that hovers, that observes, that contemplates. This reveals something profound about the divine nature, that absolute power does not impose itself. It hides itself. That true greatness does not show itself. It waits to be discovered, that which is eternal needs no proof. This shift in perspective shakes our entire mindset. We've been taught to seek God in words, doctrines, and rituals. But what if he's also, or primarily, present in the pauses, in the moments when everything seems stagnant, but within, something invisible is being gestated? What if revelation isn't in sound, but in listening? This symbolism changes everything, because when silence reveals itself as language, it also becomes a mirror, and what it reflects is mystery, the dimension of the divine that cannot be contained in any name, any book, any altar, a dimension that can only be accessed by those who have the courage to be silent within, to leave the outside world and enter this inner sanctuary where mystery still breathes, even without a word being spoken. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because if silence is this manifestation of the eternal, then there's more to it than reverence. There's purpose. There's a conscious choice. And perhaps the question is no longer, why was God silent? But rather, what did he want us to learn in this silence? Comment here. The veil is still between us. Just so I know that the symbol touched you too. Perhaps creation did not begin with a word, but with silence. And it is in this silence that mysteries of creation still echo, not as a memory of the past, but as a continuous vibration, still pulsating in the fabric of reality. An invisible echo that doesn't age, doesn't fade, and can be perceived by those who dare to hear what cannot be said. This presents us with an uncomfortable and, at the same time, transformative revelation. What if the greatest secret of creation lies not in what has been revealed, but in what has been left out? Throughout this journey so far, we've explored silence not as absence, but as deliberate presence. And now, a new question begins to form, not in the mind, but in the deeper consciousness. What did God not mean? And more than that, why did you choose not to say? When we understand that the Creator does not commit omissions by chance, we begin to understand that silence is not an interval from the truth. It is the truth itself protecting itself from being trivialized. This realization changes everything, because suddenly it's no longer about seeking new answers, but about refining the questions, about cultivating a different kind of listening, a listening that doesn't wait for sounds, but for signs, a listening that recognizes that there are messages hidden behind the scenes of existence, waiting for souls mature enough to understand them, not with reason, but with presence. Creation, then, is not just an ancient event. It is a living, constant vibration, and the silence that precedes it remains present, permeating the gaps in our understanding, the voids in our certainties. the spaces where logic cannot reach. And it is precisely in these spaces that the greatest revelations occur. How many times in your life have you encountered a moment when everything seemed suspended, when time slowed down, when you felt something great approaching, but couldn't name it? Moments of transition, of profound decisions, of inexplicable pain or silent awakenings. All of these carry the same pattern, the same soundless sound, the same energy that was there in the beginning, when the Spirit hovered over the waters. And perhaps this is the invitation hidden in divine silence, to recognize that not every revelation needs to be spoken, that there is a language that precedes the word, that there are truths that cannot be taught, only remembered, felt, honored, and that, for this very reason, they remain hidden, not as punishment, but as preservation. This is a true impact of this journey, realizing that God is not only in what was written, but also in what was carefully veiled, and that silence, far from being an obstacle, is the portal itself, a portal that challenges us to let go of the rush, the anxiety for answers, the obsession with control, and enter into a deeper, more spiritual, more complete listening. Now I want to delve even deeper into the subject, because if silence holds the origin, then perhaps it also holds the end. Or rather, what comes after the last word? What remains when all that could be said has already been said? Comment here. What is unsaid calls me, just so I know that this silence is also awakening something in you. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognizes the silence. Maybe not with words, but with that hard-to-explain feeling, as if something old had just been recalled. And that's why this space exists, for us to walk together on this kind of journey that can't be explained but can be felt. If this content resonated with you, if it truly touched you at some point, subscribe to the channel, not only so you don't miss the next episodes, but because this community is forming precisely around these revelations that almost no one talks about. And the more people like this, the deeper we can go. Take advantage and comment below. I'm with you until the end, just so I know you've stayed here, whole, present. It's the most beautiful way to continue this conversation. And if this video made you think, made you feel, leave a like. It's a silent sign that the connection was real. There's a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there, because the silence hasn't finished speaking yet.